The way this new form of nationalism appears is that it's a nationalism that is aggressive against its neighbors, and many policies in the interwar years are domestic and foreign policies center around governments trying to regain territory which they perceive as being necessary for a cohesive national group. So, for example, in Hungary, which loses two-thirds of its territory, it looks especially to Slovakia and Romania as areas in which there are a large number of ethnic Magyars or Hungarians, and the entire interwar period is an obsession with taking this land back, regaining this land. So this kind of nationalism is aggressive against its neighbors. It sees this idea if there are any of those who are of our ethnic group outside of our borders, we need to somehow include them now by expanding our borders. And when we talk about this idea of Hitler wanting Lebensraum or living space, it's pretty typical in the area that all these new nations of Central and Eastern Europe are all looking to expand their borders based on some perceived mythic land or territory that they once had. One of the first emerging forms of this new form, or a heavily influenced form of nationalist kind of agenda, is seen in fascism. And fascism is first coined by Mussolini. He has a group called the Fascio di Combattimento, which is it's like a combat fascist group. Fasces was a bundle of sticks that was was symbolic of the Roman Empire, and fascism, as expressed by Mussolini, is not a detailed political ideology. If we look at communism or scientific socialism, the amount of writings that go with that and intellectualism that surrounds that as to what this theory means and how it would be applied and blah blah blah, it's this massive ideological presence in terms of the intellectual world. Fascism's not that at all. Fascism is never clearly expressed by Mussolini. There's a paper that he's coined with called "What is Fascism?" that actually Mussolini had someone else generally write for him. It doesn't say much. What fascism meant to Mussolini was power. Fascism was to take a nation state like Italy, which was newly formed again. Italy doesn't exist before the 1860s. When we think, oh, I'm Italian, this means certain things. My people come from this area and blah blah blah, and think of themselves as Italian. No, the idea that Italians consider themselves as Italian is a 20th century phenomena in many ways. You would be more willing to say, I'm from Sicily, I'm Sicilian, or I'm from Lombardy, or I'm Venetian from Venice. This idea of a cohesive nation state, it's a 20th century kind of expression of ideas that formulated in the 19th century. So what does Mussolini want in terms of fashion? He wants power and the illusion or the perception of Italy being a powerful nation. And one of these ways he wants to express this is by gaining territory, and he looks to areas on the Dalmatian coast and Albania. He wants to redress historical wrongs. For example, when the Abyssinians, which is modern-day Ethiopia, defeated the Italians, one of the things Mussolini will be involved with is attacking Abyssinia for no apparent reason. Again, to redress some kind of historical wrong. It's not a clearly thought out economic agenda, as in some of the cases of some of these new ideologies. For Mussolini, it's all about pomp. It's all about the parade. It's all about an expression of power and the black shirts and all these other things we'll be talking about later. So fascism is just kind of it's a name put on a political style of nationalism that's extremely aggressive, is how I would kind of characterize it. When we look at National Socialism or Nazism, and that's how it's broken down. Nazi is a acronym. It's a it's not a clearly defined economic strategy. Much of it is what we are not. Hitler is very much against communism, although he applies many of the same types of socialist behavior in terms of political control over many of the industries in Germany later on, and certain social programs and social benefits. These are included under National Socialism, but again, socialism is a slippery term here, and he would never call himself a socialist like a communist. He calls that kind of socialism Bolshevism. The Bolsheviks were those who took over Russia, and there's this anti-communist movement really from the middle of World War I all the way through really until the 1990s. And many of his policies and his justifications for what he does is in response to what happened in Russia in 1917 when the communists take over. And so anti-Bolshevism is a major part of National Socialism or Nazism. Part of his political agenda is also what he defines as the Jewish question. And the Jewish question for Hitler was how he was going to remove Jews from Europe, and he sees them as this great pariah, but in reality it's like a ghost in Germany. The Jewish population in Germany proper was very, very small, a very small percentage. The Jews were fully assimilated into German culture. What you might think of as Orthodox Jews or Jews in a traditional dress and such is not something you would have seen on the streets of Berlin typically. The Jews were middle class entrepreneurs basically in Germany, and very well educated and just part of the general middle class. But in terms of when the economic depression happens, they're going to be used as a scapegoat, even though they're generally not there. Where are they? Most of the Jews are in Eastern Europe, and especially in the Polish region, which had close to 3 million Jews at one time. So that's part of the agenda as well. Another part of his agenda under National Socialism will be to unite all the Germans of Central and Eastern Europe. Germans had moved east for hundreds of years, kind of like Americans moved west. The Germans moved east and settled eastern towns and cities often by the invite of local kings for hundreds of years. Part of National Socialist ideology is to unite German-speaking peoples throughout Central and Eastern Europe. So these two ideas, again, it's an expression of nationalism. Nationalism to Hitler was to unite the nation as defined by him, are German speakers, Germans who are located throughout Central and Eastern Europe. What is nationalism to Mussolini? It's in the form of this fascist power, kind of adulation of power and conquering of certain areas in the region, and this harkening back to this Roman Empire that will be great again, as in terms of the Roman Empire. So at the turn of this century, nationalism is a major force, and it takes a terrible path when it's combined with social Darwinism. When we're talking about race theory, communism is going to be applied in its own unique ways, which we'll discuss, especially under Stalin, and it's going to be something that is oppressive and horrible to the peoples who are under that system. All these are radical solutions that would have normally been on the fringe of European politics, but in times of crisis, as I said before, people will turn to the worst forms of government looking for quick solutions. Each of these have ways of having quick solutions. And when we keep in mind of what happens in 20th century Europe, we have to look in terms of what's going on the ground, that people are willing to listen to these kinds of leaders and willing to participate in these ideologies. It was a time period after World War I when people felt the floor had fallen underneath everyone. All that was gained was lost, and now they're looking for ways to rebuild quickly.